Well, hi everyone. I am so glad that we have the opportunity to be here today to record this conversation with one another. We don't know who out there is going to be listening to this or watching this, so we just say hello to all of you. My name is Emily Langowitz. I'm a rabbi and have served the community at Temple Solel in Paradise Valley, Arizona for the last 3 years. And with me is my friend and colleague, Reverend Dr. Cari Jackson. We've been on a few panels together talking about reproductive rights and justice, which is a topic that both of us are very passionate about. We felt like it would be very important to be able to have this conversation with one another right now, but I think it's an important thing to do anytime. To be able to talk to each other as a white Jewish woman and a Black Christian woman about how race and religion and life have shown up for us in our own journeys. And to be able to talk to each other about that and have a real conversation and to be able to record that for all of you. So glad to be with you.
I'm glad to be with you. And so one of our demographic differences that Rabbi Emily did not mention is our age difference as well. I think we're 30 years or so difference in age, somewhere around there.
Yes, yeah.
So, which also impacts our respective journeys as it relates to issues of racism and privilege of different sorts in this country. And so what we talked about is the opportunity to share our own journeys and how our respective journeys impact the opportunities that we see in this moment and what we're prepared to seize in this moment. And so I want to share a little with you. I was in conversation with some folks a few weeks or so ago, and one person, this is before the recent murders of Black folks on the street and in their homes. And one white person asked me, so what did your racist experiences look like? And so since I know that might be a reality for many people, not quite knowing what it looks like, I just want to share from my own experience. Many years ago, when I was seminary pastor at Union in New York City, kind of diagonally across from Jewish Theological Seminary, I led a group with students and asked the question about race. And the white students asked them, so when did you first know you were white? And almost to a person, it was somewhere age 14 to 20. And the people of color in the room asked that same question, responded somewhere between ages 3 and 5. Generally, the folks who were white learned about their whiteness and in the context of some advantage that their white racial identity or perceived identity gave them, classification, etc., gave them. Those who were 3 to 5, knowing that they were whatever racial group they were, it was generally in the context of a disadvantage, something they did not have access to. Those who were white who learned on the younger end, it was often in the context of you can't play with this child anymore, or this child can't come in the house anymore because they are Black or they are brown or whatever. Not because they're not white, but because they are whatever racial group they are identified as. So I'm one of those people who knew very early on that I was Black and I did not have access to certain things. And it was often the case that my father told my brothers and me that they don't want us here. So we've got to look the best, do the best, perform the best. Almost as if we do those things, we'll be accepted in, which I often found did not really make the kind of difference my father had hoped it would. And my earliest school experience, knowing Black, white, I was in kindergarten. I had a little friend. My first boyfriend was white, and it became very clear that was not acceptable. Mm. Not from my family and not from his family, but from the community. Mm. This is not okay. The next one in the school context was in the 3rd grade, and the neighborhood that we had moved to was experiencing tremendous white flight. Mm. And even the whites who were still living in the neighborhood drove a few miles away to the next elementary school so their children didn't have to be in classes with the Black kids who were moving into the neighborhood. And I had a teacher, 3rd grade, who was so angry about having to teach Black children. And I was scared of this woman. I had never been scared of a teacher before. I was one of those, goody two-shoes kids. And, as my parents had raised me to be, and my teachers always liked me, and I was smart and, polite and all of that. And so I didn't know how to navigate a teacher not liking me. And I didn't know why she didn't like me. Not only did she not like, I could feel she hated me, and I didn't know why. So what I was doing in response to my fear was not pressing very heavily on the paper when I was handing in my assignments. I was scared to be there. And unconsciously, I knew she didn't want me there, so I was scared to press down on the, And so she kept marking my work with zeros. And she said to me, I am not going to go blind trying to read your work. So here I went from being liked and appreciated and affirmed by teachers to something that was complete opposite. And I really didn't know why. And then over the course of the months with her, I figured it out. It was solely because I was Black. And I'm glad I was able to get through that early enough, because my parents were trying to intervene and she was shutting my parents down and all of that. And I was able to figure that out early enough in the school year so I didn't fail. And I often think, what would have happened in my life if I had failed 3rd grade?
Yeah.
5th grade, my school was setting up reading classes. And in those reading, or after they had each of us take tests to assess our reading level, I scored 5th grade as at the 12th grade reading level. So the teacher who was coordinating the reading said to my homeroom teacher, in my hearing, she must have cheated. And I'm sitting there absolutely crushed. Never cheated in my life, didn't even know how to cheat, right? But it couldn't be that this Black child could read this well. And so, my teacher said, well, why don't we, he said, I know her work, she's great, but why don't we let her stay in the class and see how she does? So, you know, those were my earliest foundations in the academic setting, and that continued in college with teachers saying, you know, professors saying to me in my face, you're not smart enough to go to law school, which many years later, I did, and I graduated from law school. And I was sharing with Emily, one of my professors who made a profound impact on me was a self-avowed atheist Jew. Oh, but I left out this. He was a yarmulke-wearing, self-avowed atheist Jew. Mm. And I came into the class that, of course, was utopian societies. I came into the class expecting to be treated equally. I was the only student of color in the class. And I said, when I walked in, I said, maybe white people want to have some fantasy of utopian society. Most people of color, we're just trying to get to an equal one, not even a utopia. But there I was, and he was one of the most racist professors I experienced. And he would look at me directly in my eyes, smirk on his face, and he would call on someone else. He did it repeatedly, such that all of the students observed this. And, you know, all of those things continued in the workplace, continued as I served as pastor in progressive space, in predominantly white congregations that wanted to embrace diversity in its multiple ways, but being led by someone of color is not the same thing as sitting in the pew next to someone of color. And the ways in which people fought me in pastoral ministry, in congregational ministry, was just absolutely painful to me. And it is the case for me. In a lot of ways, I rather deal with someone who understands their own racism than with people who see themselves as never having been tainted by racism or infected by it or living post-racially. Those, for me, Emily, are the folks who are even harder to deal with. Yeah. Because folks have a fantasy of themselves as having arrived somewhere, and they haven't.
Yeah, 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 yeah. And, you know, I hear in those experiences you're sharing, people behave in racist ways for a multitude of their own understandings of reasons, right? Some of those people that you're describing, they really actively thought to themselves, this Black girl isn't smart enough to be able to read, right? They had that sort of active awareness of hatred. And it sounds like in some of these cases, it's people behaving in a racist way and not able to acknowledge that that's what's guiding them.
Yes.
They have this picture of, you know, what a religious space looks like, what an academic space looks like, what a religious leader looks like, what a successful academic person looks like. And they don't ever evaluate to themselves, I wonder why that all looks a certain way.
Right, right. And most of those things we learn very early in our lives. And so we often operate in a very bifurcated way. There's that younger person who was socialized to believe particular narratives. And then there's the older person, the adult, who has their own rational approach to things. And both live right here together. And I would even imagine the teacher who thought I had cheated on the 5th grade reading test. I would imagine if anyone had asked her back then, if her self-understanding was as a racist, that she didn't like Black people, or 9 times out of 10, she would not have had that self-understanding. But there was a narrative operating unconsciously often that said Black people are not as smart as white people. And if they get in, and that was the other thing, that I encountered in undergrad and in certain workplaces, especially in the 70s and 80s, when there was a lot of push for affirmative action, there was often the assumption that I got in wherever, I was admitted into whatever workplace or academic program solely because of that 10% set aside. And so never a recognition of, hey, this is a person who has the juice, if you will, to do whatever is called for in this particular context. And so that was always very, very challenging to deal with. And I can't undo a perspective that a professor has. And my very first undergraduate professor, who was assigned as my advisor, said to me, well, I know you're only here because we had to have 10% of this. And that's what a wonderful introduction to the school.
Yeah.
So what about you? Tell me about your journey and how you have navigated the religious oppression that I imagine you've experienced as a Jew in America, and how's that intersect with racial oppression from your perspective?
Yeah. I grew up in Wellesley, Massachusetts, which is a suburb west of Boston, very white, and predominantly Christian. And for a long time, growing up, I think I not at age 3 or 5 was aware of my whiteness. I was aware of my Jewishness and how that made me other from the people around me. And I remember feeling, I've done a lot of personal work around how I relate to Christianity because of how I grew up and feeling so othered. It was having to be the only kid who brought matzah to the birthday party over Passover, and everyone asking, what is that? Why do you have that? I sang in choir, and I had a choir teacher in high school who told us all, we did a holiday concert, and it was all Christmas songs, Christmas carols, with this public high school. And he said, well, that's what all your parents are coming for, is to hear all the carols, to hear everything.
All of your parents.
And I thought, what are my parents coming for? And I had experiences even with friends who knew me, who cared about me, who, heard whatever they were hearing in their religious communities and would say to me something like, well, you're not going all the way to hell because Jesus was Jewish too. So, that gives, or different versions of that. And I remember. Wow.
Not all the way to hell.
All the way. I thought, which part am I going to?
Wow.
I think it was something my parents really didn't want us to feel afraid of our Jewishness or othered by that identity. I remember in middle school, somebody drew a swastika in one of the bathrooms. And I remember my parents being very, it's not a big deal. They're just, pulling a prank. That's not really, I think they were trying to protect us.
Yes.
Feeling like the full impact of what that symbol meant. And even if it was a prank, what it meant to have that in a space that they sent their kid to school. So, I think I grew up with, I think I benefit from where I've been born, from my place in life, in terms of what I experience as a Jew. I think a lot about, my great grandmother, for who I am named, came to this country when she was 16 by herself, um, from Hungary, like what would now be Hungary, in looking for a place to be safe. And I think about, me at 16, my choir director was, into Christmas carols, but I benefit greatly from living in America, from being born at the time that I was. And I think it's hard I think for many Jewish people, we kind of carry around that awareness of, for me at least, this sense of gratitude that I'm living at a time where it could have been so much worse. And the thing that I experience as a Jew that have made me feel othered, it just feels like, if that's what it is, then that's okay. So I think it was very important for me to come to terms with the fact that I live in a society that does not presume Jewishness. That
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
that's that was something that when I was younger I felt very angry about, and I think through work that I've done, through conversations I've had with friends who are Christian and who see a different way of what that means about who I am and all of those things, that that's been very healing in terms of like, I can live in this identity and sort of weather the otherness in a different
mm-hmm.
way. And I think, I think many Jews, I'm of Eastern European origin. All of my, background is Ashkenazi Jews, Poland, Russia, Ukraine, Hungary.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I see, and I've worked on this within myself, that I think many Jews of that origin who read as white in society and who are white, who are treated as white, struggle with reconciling with sort of what that racial identity means
Mm-hmm,
with
mm-hmm,
their religious identity, because
mm-hmm.
Judaism is also sort of ethnic and cultural and people
Yes.
based, and to have the race piece and the religion piece, and it's all kind of mixed together.
Yes.
And so I think it's taken a lot of work to kind of detangle for myself the reality of the otherness I experienced among other white people
Mm-hmm,
because
mm-hmm.
of my religion, and the reality of the benefits that I have of being a white person.
Wow. I really appreciate you talking about all of those intersections. And, I often hear people say to me that I'm privileged because I have the academic degrees that I have. And it is a privilege that I have them. Now, I had to go through some particular challenges to get them because of dealing with racism, navigating that in the course of those academic experiences. And I know that having the particular academic exposure and the degrees themselves, how that gives me certain access in ways that many Black people in America don't have. However, when I walk down the street or when I'm in a store, I grew up very early recognizing social surveillance. And it's that look in the store where one clerk is watching you and signaling to the others to watch you because, those people steal. And I know that, or those people can't afford whatever we have in this particular store. And I know that Oprah Winfrey has experienced that, and Barack Obama, and well, actually, every Black person I know, but they've talked about theirs. And now I'm experiencing a different kind of surveillance. Well, not that the prominent one I've had these 63 years is gone.
Right.
But in addition to that, there's two other kinds of surveillance I have begun experiencing the past 2 weeks. And one is she one of those agitants, one of those protesters? Is she one of those looters? So I get that look, as if protesters and looters are the same, but anyway, that. And I also get this surveillance now that says, oh, there's a Black person, let me be nice. So I can prove to myself that I'm not racist. And I am tired of the surveillance.
Yeah.
And, so one of the questions I have been asking white people everywhere I go, well, I'm not going a whole lot of places now. I'm still very COVID-19 conscious. But I'm curious why it took the recording of a man's death, and not just the recording of death, because we've seen some others before, but the recording of his death by a police officer who was so glibly engaged in murder, with his hands in his pocket and looking around at the people who were filming it. And so I was just really saying, why did it take something so traumatic to really get it in people's consciousness that the kind of violence that Black folks have been talking about is real? And the recording of Ahmaud Arbery trying to run away from the truck. We didn't get recorded video of Breonna Taylor, but these stories are not uncommon. Yeah. And for those who might have gone to Birmingham, there's the memorial with the names of as many people known who were lynched. And still, lynching is not a federally recognized hate crime in this country after all of these years. And so, I really think about, what do we have to turn off within our own souls not to believe people when they tell us? What's the narrative we have about those who tell those stories? Similar to individuals who have been sexually assaulted, and especially if they're sexually assaulted by a priest or a rabbi, that people, or a parent, people really don't want to believe that because of some narrative that is operating. And, I think we need to do much more introspection about what's the narrative I have about police officers, school teachers, clergy, parents, whatever, that I don't believe somebody's report. Because most people are not just a sexual assault survivor unless they have a mental health challenge. 99% of people will not put themselves in harm's way to report something. And how can we as society believe people when they tell us, and that we don't need a video recording to capture the whole traumatic event? I mean, this has been happening, and the surveillance has been happening. The statements to students of color, you're not smart enough to do X, Y, Z, and I'm going to fail you, and marking students down, and in the workplace, I remember for many years, because I was the articulate Black who didn't scare the white people, I was often asked to be on certain task forces and special teams and blah, blah, blah. And I would be the only person of color in there, time after time after time after time. And the white people sitting next to me would turn their backs to me. It was like, she doesn't have anything to say. She's of no value. I don't even want to sit next to her. And then it would often be when I would speak, then they would turn toward me. But then they would turn back away from me. It would be very interesting to watch that. But I'm going to tell you, Emily, I'm not speaking for all Black people. I'm just speaking for this 63-year-old Black woman. I am so tired. And one of my dearest friends, a Black man who studied at Juilliard in the 1940s, amazing, amazing singer, and even more amazing human being. Fred used to say, and I'm going to say it in Fred's voice, "It's all an inside job, sugar." And thank you, Fred. Blessings. It's all an inside job. We can do these external things and look at system reform and da-da-da, all of which is wonderful, great, and fine. But as Einstein said, problems cannot be solved at the same level of consciousness at which they are created. So unless we do the inner work and really look at, how am I privileged? What have I been doing with my privilege? And not say, I'm not privileged. This is the last thing I want to say, and then I want to come back to you, Emily.
Yeah.
Several years ago, I was in a hotel room for several days. I had gone to a denominational conference. I'm ordained in United Church of Christ, which touts itself as being one of the most progressive Christian denominations. Well, I missed most of the General Synod because I was in my hotel room most of the time, flat on the floor in tears. Because while I was there, shortly after I arrived in the hotel, it was like God pulled a curtain open and started showing me some things about my life that I didn't want to see. And my first response was, that's not me. And that was my hubris. I had this sense of who I am, and I'm the one that people say, oh, Cari, you're walking, talking love. And God was showing me some situations in my own life where I wasn't very loving to people. And so I didn't want to see it. Again, my hubris. That was the first H. Then I went to a second H, and that was humiliation. I felt so much guilt and shame about what I saw when I owned that these are ways that I had behaved. These are things I had done or had left undone. Hubris to humiliation. And then I went to a third place. I went to humility. I said, oh my gosh, I've shown up in ways treating people not very loving at times, and yet they still love me. I've shown up in ways not doing my work of helping to repair the world, and God still loves me. So I was feeling deep humility and, oh, this is awesome, 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 awesome. And then finally I got to the fourth H. So I started a hubris, humiliation, humility, and then the fourth H in my movement was humanity. I gained a fuller understanding, a more comprehensive and holistic understanding of what it means to be.
Yeah.
I've got stuff in there that I love and I don't mind the world knowing about. And there's stuff also, still mine, still me, that I don't even want to know about, least of all other people. All of it is me. And the more I'm able to hold all of that in truth and honesty, the more I can hold that as truth for other people as well.
Mm.
I pray that I'm able to bring the best of who I am as I relate with others in ways that inspire the best of who they are to come forth. But always knowing I can't control whether that comes forth in someone else or not. And so I really wanted to share that because that's been an important journey for me, and especially as I work with folks who see themselves as progressives and liberals, there's so much hubris. And so really inviting people not to stay stuck between those two stages, I think, between hubris and humiliation, because then people go back to hubris. And we really need us to move to the next stage.
Yeah.
And be, I think that's the only way that we can really have justice. And, you know, Micah 6:8, you know, pursue justice, love mercy, and walk humbly. I say with God and your neighbor. And we can't, in my thinking, we can't fully have justice if we don't have humility.
Yeah.
And so that's what I'm really wanting to encourage as many of us as possible, especially my white sisters and brothers. Look at the hubris, humiliation toggle that we can get stuck in and be able to break through that. And it takes a certain courage and strength, I think, to break through that and go to that place. But even when we get to the humanity, for us to understand it's an ongoing process.
Yes.
It's not a one-time, oh, I arrived here. Because the moment we say, I've arrived, that really has taken us back to hubris.
Yeah. I think so much of what you're saying is so resonant, and those 4 H's, that's going to stick with me, and I hope, you know, sticks with people who listen to this piece of things. You know, you asked, you know, you're asking people why now? Why does it take watching murder, watching trauma that people are already experiencing and speaking about and telling you, yelling at you, this is happening to us? And why does it take that to have to mobilize people? And, you know, I wish I knew, but I think a big part of it is it's really freaking uncomfortable to have to do the work. It's really uncomfortable to recognize that whether or not you feel like an active participant in what led to the video we watched of George Floyd being murdered, you are in some way an active participant as a white person. And it's really uncomfortable to have that conversation with yourself. And it's a lot safer because you're not exposed to, you know, I'm not exposed to that surveillance, right? I walk around a store and I do what I want. And it's a lot safer for me to not have to confront that and just say, well, but I'll just keep living my life. I'm not a bad person. I'm not doing it on purpose. But, you know, it's just too hard. And I think whatever the combination of things in this moment, of this really clear and graphic video, that we're all home and we kind of have to watch things,
Yes.
that we have nowhere else to go, nowhere else to look. You have to look. Whatever that combination is, I think is forcing us to be uncomfortable and to reckon, to make a reckoning. And, what I fear is that, as has happened many times before, that we'll sort of ride the reckoning wave and then stop reckoning. And I think, as a white person to other white people, I would say you just have to keep doing the work, because it's not fair. It's not fair for me to get to just decide I'm going to sit in my own comfort when other people are suffering because of it. And I know that's hard. It's hard for me. It's hard for a lot of white people. But I am, Judaism says it's not upon you to finish the work, but neither are you free to desist from it. And that is my family's motto that I grew up with. And it's my motto right now. I think a lot of people, and I feel this in myself also, this desire to, we got to get it all done this week. I got to solve racism this week. It's got to happen now. And it's not going to. And I think that takes us back to that toggle you're talking about of, the hubris and then the humiliation. And then we say, oh, I can't do it anymore. It's too hard. I'm just going to stop. Right. And I think to really give ourselves the knowledge, like, this is a marathon, not a sprint.
Yes.
And
yes.
You don't have to finish the work, but you're not free to desist from it. So I think that's, it's so important. And I also think, especially for Jews right now, a few things that are important. One is, white Jewish people sometimes think of ourselves as a monolith. And actually, there's lots of Jews who are not white. And I think it's really important not just to see this as, oh, well, that's America out there and the police and this and that, but to actually take a look at our own communities and institutions and teachings and who we lift up and what voices we're listening to within Judaism, and come to this recognition that Judaism within itself needs to have a reckoning around racism and race. That I think sometimes we sort of think of, oh, all Jews are white and therefore our job is out there, when in fact our job is also in our own communities.
Indeed.
And I'll also say, I think a lot of Jews, we sort of look at the 1960s and we go, good job, guys. Right?
That's that hubris.
We have the picture of the Torah, and it's in Selma, and it's next to Dr. King, and we were there praying with our feet. We did it.
We were praying with our feet, yes.
Yeah. And,
Tikkun olam, yes.
I think it's such an important legacy to recognize that, Jewish people have been a part of the work to cease oppression in different eras, in different times. Good, that should be part of our stories.
Yes.
And also, that took a lot of work. It took a lot of all that discomfort. And there were Jews back then who were not doing that work and needed to come around to that work. And I don't think we get to sort of rest on the laurels of that in a way that absolves us of doing the work now. I think that should push us even further to say, okay, my ancestors did this because they were, fueled by an understanding of their responsibilities as Jews to the world. And so what am I going to do in my generation?
Yeah. And, I'm really appreciating everything you have said. And, when I talk with folks who are Italian ancestry, and they talk about how their family, in a way, traded their Italian culture for whiteness. And yes, while they still hold on to aspects of the culture because Italians were called Black when they first came. And I know many Jews were called, Schwarze when they first came here, etc. And sometimes there's this exchange that happens and giving up part of oneself in order to achieve whiteness, because there's if not a conscious, there's an unconscious recognition of that as the creme de la creme. Mm-hmm. And it's all run to proportions I'm sorry to see in this country now. And I'm so grateful for the folks in nations around the world have been in solidarity with the US, and recognizing it is not only about policing, it's multiple aspects of the influences of how Black and brown and Native bodies, because I can't leave out of this conversation what has been done to Natives, has been and continues to be done to Indigenous communities. And we've got a lot of work to do. Again, we can't solve problems at the same level of consciousness, so it is my prayer that as we have conversations like this, it helps us rise to another level of consciousness so we can begin exploring new ways to be in community together and hopefully create something new. It is my hope and my prayer that 30 years from now, if I'm still here at 93, I'm not having the same conversation. Mm. That doesn't mean won't need to have some conversations, but may it not be the same.
Yeah.
Thank you for this time.
Thank you.
Really, really appreciate you. And I feel we are blessed to have you here in Arizona, and so glad I got to meet you. And I look forward to ways we continue to work together. And we will find some ways, I know we will.
We will.
Be partners in, not in justice, but partners in I mean, not in crime, but partners in justice.
Partners in justice, yeah. I pray that as well. And I'm just so appreciative of the power of being able to share stories with one another and being able to talk with each other and see each other for ourselves and who we are, and also what we've experienced and go through. So thank you.
Bless you. Talk to you soon.
Yes.
All right. Bye-bye.